This is JR97 Reviews, that's his cat, and today I'm going to be ranking and reviewing the Hellboy films, the live action films, the first one released in 2004, the sequel in 2008, and the reboot in 2019. I'll be doing these from worst to best. Thanks for watching. Released 11 years after Guillermo del Toro's second and unfortunately final outing with the character, and rebooting and recasting the franchise, Hellboy 2019 sees the titular character caught between the worlds of the supernatural and human as he battles an ancient sorceress bent on revenge. The film was unfortunately always on the back foot and fighting uphill from its inception due to the huge fanfare surrounding the Del Toro and Perlman features and the public bitterness from those two themselves surrounding the cancellation of the third installment. However, even internally, the production process of this reboot was apparently a mess of studio interference and clashing between the director and cast. Honestly, what this film was riding on was its R rating, which it is extremely proud of, and its alleged faithfulness to the source material. I can't deny that when I first watched this, I did find it a lot of fun. It was 2 hours of extremely gory nonsense, and due to the shockingly poor reviews, my expectations were substantially lowered when going in. Revisiting it now though, that is not the case, especially having just watched the first two films the day prior. The story structure is all over the place, due to frequent flashbacks and the film's post-production problems, and there is no substance to anything at all. The dialogue is 90% exposition, and the film expects the audience to already have an existing knowledge of the material. Hellboy's first appearance brings absolutely nothing to the character or any context for the audience to latch onto at all. Hellboy isn't even the driving force of the story whatsoever and just happens to get caught up in it along the way. The story itself is essentially a fetch quest to find all the pieces. Yes, it does already sound like Infinity War, but this is nowhere near as good. The pieces of the Blood Queen before she can reassemble and, you guessed it, destroy humanity. The world building is very surface level and no significant time is spent anywhere because the film charges along to cram in as much fan service as possible for it to become interesting or involving outside of its initial set design. There are endless characters introduced throughout and none of them have any development, and if they do, it's dull and predictable. It is a shame that the film wastes so much potential because there is some genuinely excellent horror imagery and practical effect work on display. Baba Yaga and her chicken-legged house with a grotesque banquet inside is probably the highlight, and her appearance and contortionist movements are suitably grim, and the finale creature designs are undeniably awesome. The film is genuinely violent as hell at times, pun intended. Limbs are torn off and blood sprays everywhere, faces are ripped to shreds and guts spill all over the place. The action is solid throughout, though the attempts at capturing the John Wick style long takes and single shot camera work feels very forced and choppy at times. The CGI is definitely dodgy at times as well, and that might be due to the fact that they spent all the money on the very expensive rock-heavy soundtrack featuring Muse, Motley Crue, Alice Cooper and more. Though very enthusiastic in capturing the attitude of the character, David Harbour lacks the personality and charm that Perlman brought to the role. He's frequently whiny and his emphasis on certain words and loud shouting does become irritating. He also mumbles and can't express himself with all the makeup on top of him. Mila Jovovich is clearly having a blast chewing all the scenery in sight, but she is a boring villain in terms of motivation. Stephen Graham's foul-mouthed pig monster wears thin after a while, Ian McShane definitely feels like he's on autopilot at times, and Sasha Lane and Daniel Day-Kim are both uninteresting side characters. Hellboy 2019 isn't as awful as some might say, but it's certainly not very good either, and the novelty of blood and gore and swearing has mostly lost its impact on this rewatch. The horror imagery and practical effects are strong, and the action is schlocky fun at times. However, the story is a cluttered and underdeveloped mess, the characters lack the chemistry and interest of the previous films. Overall, I'll give Hellboy 2019 a 4 out of 10. One of the most notable comic book features of the 2000s, and still featuring a strong following hoping for a third installment to this day. Hellboy sees a demon raised from infancy after being conjured by and rescued from the Nazis, grow up to become a defender against the forces of darkness. Having successfully entered the comic book genre with Blade 2 2 years prior, Guillermo del Toro truly invested himself in this project by penning the screenplay and bringing his unique otherworldly stylistic approach to the source material's already darker horror gothic tinged fantastical style. However, the unfocused and generic story and several uninteresting characters do hinder the film throughout. The overarching plot isn't bad, it's simply just another villain wants to bring about the end of the world story and ticks off many of the cliches of the genre. Hellboy's origin is well presented though and sets up the antagonist well. However, the pacing can feel a bit clunky and slow at times, and other subplots such as Hellboy's jealousy of Agent Myers and Liz's potential romance, which, whilst comedically fun, feels a bit like padding of the runtime. Luckily, the world building is very intriguing and mysterious, and the potential of exploration is immediately ripe. The visual style of the film is excellent, blending the slick, grittier and CGI heavy action of the current time of release, and with Del Toro's exquisitely designed and intricately detailed sets and locations, as well as the creative and brilliant looking practical effects, costumes and props used to create the world of Hellboy and its inhabitants. The brilliantly designed Abe Sapien, the drooling, screaming Samael hellhounds, the tentacular terror of the final creature, Hellboy himself spot on makeup and prosthetics, and the savage clockwork maniacal Cronin. The action is solid with some great practical punch-ups and shootouts, but nothing truly stand out or definitive. This is Ron Perlman's defining role and the one that put him on the mainstream map, perfectly encapsulating the cocky dry wit and swagger of the character, as well as the stroppy immaturity. Doug Jones' calm, well-spoken, intelligent Abe Sapien is a nice contrast. Rupert Evans is fine as the audience POV Myers. Selma Blair's spaced out and edgy Liz is good, but she doesn't have enough to do here. John Hurt is excellent as Hellboy's father, and though his performance is scenery chewing, Karel Roden's Rasputin isn't particularly memorable. Hellboy is still a very solid comic book film that holds up well today. The visual style, design, practical effects, props and costumes are excellent, and the action is fun. However, the unfocused generic story and slower pacing are noticeable. Overall, I'll give Hellboy 2004 7 out of 10.
You woke up the baby.
Hellboy 2 The Golden Army sees a prince of the mythical world start a rebellion against humanity in order to rule the Earth, and it's up to Hellboy and his team to fight and stop him from locating the all-powerful Golden Army. This sequel basically improves on every aspect of its predecessor and allowed Del Toro even more creative control, with him creating his own original characters and narrative not based on an already existing comic book story. The creativity here is off the charts, the new side characters and antagonists are more engaging and distinct, and the action is far more large scale and impressive than before. The story is far more fantasy heavy than its predecessor, and leans far more heavily into Lord of the Rings-esque world building and presentation, and an epic War of Elves and Humans backstory for the plot to build upon. Narratively, the film is far more focused and streamlined in terms of the pacing, and is much better without the focus and time spent on subplots. The film ticks off a lot of the genre boxes, sure, and in terms of shocks and reveals, it doesn't have too many surprises. With his rightly critically acclaimed and arguably defining feature Pan's Labyrinth releasing 2 years prior, Del Toro brings a lot of inspiration and style from said feature to the forefront here, with heavy emphasis on fairies, large meticulously crafted wooden nature-inflicted sculptures and set design, and creepy mysterious creatures played by Doug Jones, that definitely bring the pale man to mind. The film is simmering with colour, creativity and imagination. I could have spent the whole runtime exploring the troll market alone due to how instantly immersive and filled to the brim with some of the most obscure and strange creatures I've ever seen on display. The opening animated backstory of the titular army is unique and bold, the practical effects, costumes and designs are once again incredible and perfect with CGI augmentation, especially the new character Johann Kraus. The action set pieces are far better choreographed and with large scale ambition, from the skin-peeling Tooth Fairy attack, the Troll Market brawl, the over-the-top and beautiful last elemental battle, the clash with the Golden Army, and the several duels are swift, well-choreographed and entertaining. Ron Perlman once again delivers as expected as Hellboy, fully establishing the role and delivering even more snark and humour, as well as selflessness and courage. Selma Blair gets more to do as Liz here, which is good with some fiery action moments and strong chemistry with Perlman. Doug Jones also once again delivers as Abe, and seeing he and Hellboy get drunk together is a comedic highlight. He also plays the warbling and strange Chamberlain and the hissing, grinning Angel of Death. The few actors that voice and play Johann Kraus do a top job of crafting the eccentric, bossy scientist. Whilst Prince Nuada is still a fairly generic villain, Luke Goss's presence and performance certainly put him above Rasputin from the last film. Hellboy 2 The Golden Army is a superb sequel that improves and expands on the first film in basically every way. The action, imagination, characters and story focus are all excellent, and it was a real shame that Del Toro never got to finish his trilogy. Overall, I'll give Hellboy 2 The Golden Army 8 out of 10. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Let me know in the comments what you thought of my ranking and what your personal ranking would be if you watched the video. Hope you have another video up soon. As always, please like, comment, subscribe, and I'll speak to you again soon. Cheers.